Commander stood at the wide window of her ship's observation deck. Her forearms were crossed behind her back as she watched a small, ugly vessel approach her ship. The human craft looked like someone had built it from scrap metal and spare parts. Black smoke came from its engines, and she could see patches welded over holes in its hull. The hegemony research vessel Luminous Dawn was 3 times the size of most space stations. Its white and gold hull gleamed under the distant sun's light. Weapons that could destroy planets were hidden beneath smooth armor plating. The ship carried enough firepower to flatten entire worlds, and everyone in this part of space knew it. Had been a commander for over 200 years. She had seen dozens of species make first contact with the hegemony. They always reacted the same way. First came awe at the massive ship. Then came fear when they learned what the hegemony could do. Finally came submission as they realized they had no choice but to join or be destroyed. Humans were supposed to be different according to the reports. They were young, having only left their home world 50 years ago. They had no advanced technology and no powerful weapons. Their ships were slow and their colonies were small. By all accounts, they should be easy to deal with. The human ship docked with a loud clang that echoed through the hull, made her way to the docking bay, her tall frame moving with practiced grace. Her purple skin shimmered under the bright lights, and her large eyes could see details that would be invisible to most species. She wore the formal robes of a hegemony commander, dark fabric with silver threads that caught the light. The docking bay was huge, designed to make visitors feel small and helpless. Rows of hegemony soldiers stood at attention, their weapons gleaming. Each soldier represented a different species that had joined the hegemony. Some looked like giant insects, others like living rocks, still others like creatures from ancient nightmares. The message was clear. The hegemony was powerful and resistance was pointless. The airlock opened with a hiss of escaping gas. 3 humans stepped through and immediately focused on their leader. He was a man of average height with dark hair that was starting to turn gray. His clothes were simple and practical, showing signs of wear and repair. What caught her attention were his eyes. They were dark brown and seemed older than his face, as if he had seen more than any person should. "Captain," the man said, stepping forward with a slight bow. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Commander." Studied him carefully. Most species trembled when they first saw her. Humans were supposed to be easily frightened, according to their psychological profiles, but showed no fear. He looked around the docking bay with calm interest, taking in the soldiers and weapons without any visible reaction. "I am commander of the Hegemony Exploration Fleet," she replied in perfect English. The Hegemony had been monitoring human communications for months. "Welcome aboard the Luminous Dawn." Nodded politely. "This is Dr. Sarah, our science officer, and Lieutenant James Torres, our security chief." The other 2 humans looked nervous, which was normal, but remained perfectly calm. "Please follow me," said, turning toward the exit. "We have much to discuss." She led them through the ship's main corridors. The hallways were wide and tall, with smooth walls that seemed to glow with their own light. Holographic displays showed star maps and battle reports from across the galaxy. Crew members from dozens of species worked at control stations, their alien forms designed to intimidate visitors. "Your ship is impressive," said, looking at the displays with genuine interest. "How many crew members do you carry?" "Over 10,000, replied. "The Luminous Dawn is one of our smaller exploration vessels." Most species would have been shocked by this information. Their entire fleets often had fewer than 10,000 members, but simply nodded as if she had told him about the weather. They entered the formal meeting chamber, a room designed to overwhelm visitors with the hegemony's power and history. The walls showed holographic images of conquered worlds and defeated enemies. Flags from 100 different species hung from the ceiling, trophies of successful campaigns. The table was made from a single piece of crystal that had been mined from the core of a dead planet. looked around the room with the same calm interest he had shown everywhere else. He even smiled slightly when he saw some of the battle displays. "Please sit," said, taking her place at the head of the table. "Let us begin." She activated a holographic projector that showed a map of human space. Red dots marked their colonies, and yellow lines showed their trade routes. Compared to the vast territories controlled by the hegemony, human space looked tiny and fragile. "The hegemony has been watching your species for some time," began. "You have expanded quickly for such a young race. Your technology is primitive, but you show promise." Listened without speaking, his hands folded calmly on the table. "We are prepared to offer your species membership in the hegemony," she continued. "You would gain access to our technology, our protection, and our trade networks. In return, you would provide resources and follow hegemony law." "And if we refuse?" asked quietly. Smiled, showing teeth that were designed for tearing flesh. "Refusal is not recommended. The galaxy is a dangerous place for species that stand alone." Most negotiators would have started asking about terms at this point, or begun showing signs of fear. Did neither. Instead, he asked practical questions about trade agreements and territorial boundaries. He wanted to know about shipping routes and resource allocation. He spoke as if he were discussing a simple business deal rather than his species' future survival. "You seem remarkably calm, Captain," observed. "Do you understand what the hegemony is capable of?" Met her gaze without flinching. "I've read the reports, Commander. Your reputation precedes you." "Then you understand that cooperation is in your best interest." "I understand that you believe it is," replied. There was something in his tone that bothered, though she could not identify what it was. The human showed no fear, no awe, no recognition of the power difference between them. It was as if he saw her as an equal rather than as a representative of the most powerful force in the galaxy. "We will need time to consider your offer," said finally. "Of course," replied. "Please be our guests while you deliberate. I will have quarters prepared for you." As the humans were led away, remained in the meeting chamber, studying the star map. Something about the human captain puzzled her. In 200 years of first contact situations, she had never met anyone who reacted to the hegemony with such calm indifference. She decided that Captain needed a better understanding of what he was dealing with. The next morning, arrived at the guest quarters early. She had spent the night reviewing everything the hegemony knew about humans, trying to understand why Captain seemed so unafraid. The psychological profiles said humans were emotional creatures, quick to anger and quick to fear, yet had shown neither emotion during their meeting. "Captain," she said when he answered the door, "I thought you might like a tour of the ship. It would help you understand what membership in the hegemony offers." Was already dressed and looked well rested. "That's very kind of you, Commander. I'd be happy to see more of your vessel." They started in the weapons section. The corridor was lined with display cases showing different types of energy weapons. Each one could level a city block, and the labels explained their capabilities in cold, technical language. Examined each weapon with the same interest he might show in a museum. "This plasma rifle can punch through 12 feet of reinforced steel," explained, pointing to a sleek weapon with a glowing power cell. "Our soldiers carry them as standard equipment." "Impressive energy density," replied, leaning closer to read the specifications. "What's the effective range?" She told him, and he nodded thoughtfully. When she mentioned that the rifle could fire continuously for 6 hours without recharging, asked about heat management and power efficiency. His questions showed he understood advanced physics better than his species' technology level suggested. They moved to the ship's main weapons control center. Through a massive transparent aluminum window, they could see one of the ship's primary energy cannons. The weapon was 300 feet long and could destroy small moons with a single shot. "We have 47 weapons of this class on the Luminous Dawn," said. Each one draws power directly from our fusion cores. Whistled softly. That's a lot of firepower. What do you use for targeting at extreme range? Again, his reaction was professional curiosity rather than fear. Began to feel frustrated. She pointed out that the weapons could fire accurately at targets millions of miles away, that they could track and destroy entire fleets, that no known defensive technology could stop them. Listened and asked technical questions about guidance systems and energy propagation. Next, she took him to the military training areas. Here, soldiers from dozens of species practiced combat techniques. The warriors looked like 7-foot-tall insects with razor-sharp claws and natural armor. They resembled living stone, nearly indestructible and incredibly strong. There were energy beings that could pass through solid matter and attack from unexpected angles. Each species brings unique advantages to the hegemony military, explained. Together, they are unstoppable. Watched a training session where soldiers practiced close combat. Their movements were faster than human eyes could follow, and their claws could cut through steel. When one of them noticed watching, it turned and hissed, displaying teeth like broken glass. Fascinating, said calmly. How do they coordinate their attacks with species that move at different speeds? Explain the communication systems and battlefield coordination protocols. Listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking for clarification on tactical procedures. He showed no fear of the dangerous aliens around him, treating them as he might any other military unit. They visited the ship's detention center next. The corridors here were darker, filled with the sound of alien voices speaking in languages the universal translator couldn't identify. Cell after cell held prisoners from across the galaxy, pirates, rebels, and anyone who had challenged hegemony authority. These are the consequences of resistance, said, stopping before a cell that held a group of reptilian creatures. They attacked a hegemony supply convoy. Tomorrow they will be executed. The prisoners looked up as she spoke, their large eyes filled with hopeless fear. Looked at them with what might have been sympathy, but still showed no fear for his own safety. What's their story? Asked quietly. They claimed we were stealing resources from their home system, replied. They were wrong. The hegemony does not steal. We take what we need for the greater good of all member species. Said nothing, but she noticed him studying the prisoners carefully. When they moved on, he asked about legal procedures and trial processes. His questions were practical rather than emotional. The tour continued to the ship's intelligence center, where holographic displays showed real-time information from across the galaxy. Trade routes, military positions, political situations, and resource distributions were all tracked and analyzed. The scale of the hegemony's operations became clear as saw data flowing in from thousands of worlds. How do you process all this information? Asked, watching streams of data scroll past on dozens of screens. Advanced artificial intelligence systems, replied. They can predict rebellions before they start, identify resource shortages months in advance, and track the movements of every significant military force in known space. Nodded, studying the data displays. When he asked about the AI systems, his questions showed he understood information theory and data analysis. For a supposedly primitive human, he seemed remarkably well-educated. They ended the tour in the ship's war room, where tactical displays showed the current positions of hegemony fleets. Hundreds of ships patrolled trade routes, maintained order in member systems, and responded to threats across the galaxy. The scale of military power was overwhelming. This represents only a small fraction of our total forces, said. We maintain over 10,000 vessels of this class or larger. Our smaller ships number in the hundreds of thousands. Studied the displays carefully. That's an impressive logistics operation. How do you maintain supply lines across such distances? She explained the network of supply bases and automated manufacturing facilities. Asked about fuel consumption, spare parts inventory, and crew rotation schedules. His questions were those of someone who understood military logistics. "You seem remarkably well informed for someone from a species that has only recently left its home world," observed. Smiled slightly. "Humans are quick learners, Commander. We've had to be." As they returned to the guest quarters, felt more puzzled than ever. She had shown enough firepower to destroy his entire species, introduced him to warriors who could tear him apart with their bare hands, and demonstrated the vast scope of hegemony power. Yet he remained as calm as when they had first met. "Thank you for the tour," said as they reached his quarters. "Your ship is truly impressive. I can see why the hegemony has been so successful." "And yet you still show no fear," said, unable to hide her frustration. Paused at his door and looked at her thoughtfully. "Should I be afraid, Commander?" "Most species find the demonstration educational." "Oh, it was certainly educational," replied. "I learned quite a lot." Something in his tone suggested he had learned things she hadn't intended to teach. Before she could ask what he meant, had entered his quarters and closed the door behind him. Stood in the corridor for several minutes, trying to understand what was happening. In 200 years of service, she had never encountered a reaction like this. Most species either fell to their knees in submission or fled in terror after seeing what she had shown him. But the human captain had treated the most powerful military force in the galaxy like an interesting technical challenge. She decided that Captain needed a more personal demonstration of hegemony power. Did not sleep well that night. She kept thinking about the human captain's calm reactions to everything she had shown him. By morning, she had decided to take a more direct approach. If would not be impressed by displays of power, perhaps he needed to see that power in action. She found in the guest dining area, eating breakfast with his companions. The other two humans looked uncomfortable, which was normal. Doctor kept glancing around nervously at the alien crew members, and Lieutenant Torres had the tight expression of a soldier who knew he was, but appeared relaxed, chatting quietly with his team. "Captain," said, approaching their table, "I have arranged a special demonstration for you today, something I think you will find illuminating." Looked up from his meal. "What kind of demonstration, Commander?" "A practical test of our weapons systems. We need to clear some debris from this system's asteroid belt. I thought you might like to observe." Agreed readily, and soon they were standing in the ship's primary observation deck. Through the massive transparent walls, they could see a dead moon floating in space. It was about 50 miles across, a gray rock that had been shattered by some ancient impact. Smaller asteroids drifted around it like a cloud. "This moon has been a navigation hazard for centuries," explained. "Today we will remove it." She signaled to the weapons officer, who began the targeting sequence. Watched with interest as holographic displays showed the weapon charging up. Energy readings climbed steadily as the ship's fusion reactors fed power to the main cannon. "The target is locked, Commander," the weapons officer reported. "All crew members are secured." "Fire ordered." The weapon discharged with a sound like thunder rolling through the ship's hull. A beam of pure energy, brighter than a star, lanced out from the luminous dawn and struck the dead moon. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the entire moon began to glow white-hot. The destruction was spectacular. The moon cracked apart like an egg, then exploded in a flash of light that forced the observation deck's windows to automatically darken. When the light faded, nothing remained but glowing gas and tiny fragments of rock. "Impressive," said, studying the energy readings on the nearby displays. "What was the total energy output?" Told him, expecting shock or fear. Instead, did quick calculations in his head and nodded thoughtfully. "That's roughly equivalent to a large hydrogen bomb but focused into a much smaller area," he observed. "Very efficient." "That weapon could destroy any human city," said pointedly. "It could crack the crust of your home world." Yes, I imagine it could, replied calmly, though I assume you'd want to keep the planets intact for their resources. His matter-of-fact response frustrated even more. She had just demonstrated enough firepower to wipe out human civilization and was discussing it like an engineering problem. Perhaps you would like to see more of our capabilities, she said through gritted teeth. She led him to the ship's historical archives, where holographic displays could recreate any event in hegemony history. The archives contained detailed records of every conquest, every battle, and every species that had fallen before hegemony forces. Let me show you the fate of the Empire, said, activating a display. They were much more advanced than your species. They had energy shields faster than light weapons and a fleet of over 5,000 ships. The hologram showed a beautiful alien city with towers that reached into the clouds. Graceful beings with crystalline bodies moved through streets lined with plants that sparkled like jewels. Their technology was elegant and sophisticated, far beyond anything humans had achieved. They refused our offer of membership, continued. They claimed they were too advanced to need the hegemony's protection. The scene changed to show hegemony warships arriving in space. The battle that followed was completely one-sided. Weapons could not penetrate hegemony shields, while hegemony weapons tore through defenses like paper. In less than 6 hours, 5,000 years of civilization was reduced to burning ruins. Watched the destruction without comment. When the display showed survivors being loaded onto transport ships for relocation to mining colonies, his expression remained neutral. They were proud, said. Their pride cost them everything. What happened to their technology? Asked. Absorbed into the hegemony's research programs, replied. Nothing is wasted. She showed him more examples. The who had tried to form an alliance against the hegemony, only to be defeated when their allies abandoned them at the crucial moment. The Confederation, whose 100-world empire had been conquered in a single campaign. The who had actually managed to destroy several hegemony ships before being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Each story ended the same way: total defeat, occupation, and absorption into the hegemony. Some species adapted and prospered as members. Others were reduced to labor forces on distant worlds. A few simply disappeared from history entirely. Do you see the pattern, Captain? Asked. Every species faces the same choice: join willingly and maintain some dignity, or resist and lose everything. Studied the final display, which showed a map of current hegemony territory. Thousands of systems, billions of worlds, trillions of sentient beings all united under hegemony rule. How long did all this take? Asked. 12,000 years of steady expansion, replied proudly. We have never failed to achieve our objectives. Never. Nodded slowly. That's quite a track record. Your species is young and small, continued. You have perhaps 50 colonized worlds and a total population of 15 billion. We have ended civilizations 1,000 times larger than yours. I'm sure you have, said quietly. Studied his face, looking for any sign that her words were having an effect. Appeared thoughtful but still showed no fear. If anything, he seemed to be filing away information for later use. The hegemony does not make empty threats, Captain, she said. When we say that cooperation is in your best interest, we speak from experience. I understand, Commander. You've built an impressive empire through superior military technology and careful planning. Then you understand why resistance is pointless. Turned away from the displays and looked directly at her. I understand why you believe it is. There it was again, that subtle challenge in his tone. Felt her frustration growing. She had shown him the destruction of worlds, the fall of empires, and the fate of species that dared to challenge hegemony power. Yet the human remained unmoved. Captain, I am trying to save your species from a fate they cannot imagine, she said, allowing anger to creep into her voice. The least you could do is show proper respect for the forces you are dealing with. Looked at her with what might have been sympathy. Commander, I do respect what you've built here. The hegemony is clearly a remarkable achievement, but respect and fear are not the same thing. Perhaps they should be, replied coldly. Perhaps agreed, but they're not. As they returned to the guest quarters, realized that her demonstrations were having no effect. If anything, seemed more confident than when they had first met. It was as if he was learning something from each display of hegemony power, though she could not imagine what. That evening, she stood alone in her private quarters, looking out at the stars. In over 200 years of service, she had never encountered a reaction like this. Every other species had shown appropriate fear when faced with hegemony might. Even the most warlike races eventually recognized the hopelessness of their situation. But the human captain acted as if the most powerful military force in the galaxy was merely an interesting puzzle to be solved. Tomorrow, she decided, she would make things personal. If would not fear for his species, perhaps he would fear for his friends. Woke before dawn, her mind already made up. If Captain would not respond to demonstrations of power, then she would have to make the situation personal. She had served the hegemony for over 2 centuries, and in all that time, she had never met anyone who remained so calm in the face of overwhelming force. She summoned her security chief, a massive warrior named who looked like living stone. His species was known for their brutal efficiency and complete loyalty to the hegemony. Arrest the 2 humans who came with Captain, she ordered. Charge them with espionage. Take them to the detention center. His rocky features shifted into what might have been a smile. And the captain? Leave him free for now, but make sure he knows what has happened to his friends. An hour later, made her way to the guest quarters. She could hear shouting from inside, human voices raised in anger and fear. When she entered, she found standing calmly in the main room while security officers dragged away Doctor and Lieutenant Tors. This is illegal, Doctor was shouting. We're diplomatic representatives, you can't just. Her voice was cut off as the door slammed shut behind the security team. Stood in the sudden silence, his hands clasped behind his back. When he turned to face, his expression was unreadable. Commander, he said quietly, to what do I owe the pleasure? Your companions have been charged with espionage, replied. They were caught accessing restricted information systems. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Studied her face for a long moment before responding. I see. And what restricted information were they supposed to have accessed? Military deployment schedules, ship specifications, weapon capabilities. Moved closer to him. The penalty for espionage is death, Captain. Nodded slowly. Of course it is. When will their trial be held? That depends on several factors, said. Their cooperation, your cooperation, the decision your species makes regarding hegemony membership. His voice remained perfectly level. So this is about leverage. This is about justice, replied coldly. But justice can sometimes be flexible. She led him through the ship's corridors toward the detention center. As they walked, she pointed out the security measures, automated weapon systems that tracked their movement, force fields that could slice a person in half, guards who never slept and never showed mercy. The luminous dawn is not just a ship, Captain, she explained. It is a fortress. Even if your friends could somehow escape their cells, they would never reach the docking bays alive. Listened without comment, his eyes taking in every detail of their surroundings. When they passed a group of armed guards, he nodded politely to them as if they were meeting at a social gathering. The detention center was a maze of corridors lined with energy barriers. Behind each barrier, prisoners from across the galaxy waited for trial, punishment, or execution. Some paced their small cells like caged animals. Others sat in silent despair. A few had given up entirely and lay motionless on the floor. Here we are, said, stopping before two adjacent cells. Doctor and Lieutenant Tors were behind the energy barriers, still wearing their civilian clothes but now looking very much like prisoners. Doctor was sitting on the narrow bench that served as a bed, her face pale with shock. Tors stood near the barrier, his military training evident in the way he studied their surroundings. Doctor called out when she saw, "Thank God you're all right. These charges are completely false. We never accessed any restricted systems." "I know, Sarah," replied calmly. "Don't worry, this will be sorted out." Tors stepped closer to the barrier. "Sir, they're claiming we hacked into their computer networks, but we never even had access to their systems." "I understand," Lieutenant said. "Stay calm and follow standard protocols for prisoners of war." Watched this exchange with growing frustration. Companions were clearly terrified, which was appropriate, but himself remained as composed as ever, speaking to them as if this were a minor inconvenience rather than a life-or-death situation. "Your friends seem distressed," she observed. "They're not used to being falsely accused of crimes," replied. "It's understandable that they're upset." "The accusations are not false, Captain. We have evidence." "No, Commander, you don't, but that doesn't seem to matter to you." Led him to her private office, a spacious room with windows looking out into space. The walls were covered with awards and commendations from her long career, along with weapons and artifacts taken from conquered worlds. It was a room designed to intimidate visitors and remind them of hegemony power. "Sit," she ordered, gesturing to a chair in front of her desk. Sat down comfortably, looking around the room with polite interest. His gaze lingered on a beautiful crystal sculpture that had once belonged to a leader. "That's lovely," he said. "Is it from the—" "Yes, the artist died when his city was bombarded." Sat behind her desk, studying space. "He could have lived if his people had accepted our offer." "A shame," replied. "Such beautiful work should be preserved." Leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the desk. "Captain, let me be very clear about your situation. Your friends are going to die unless you give me what I want." "And what is that?" "Submission. Acknowledgement that you understand the power you are facing. Some small sign that you recognize the hopelessness of your position." Was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes focused somewhere beyond her shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Commander, what would happen if I got down on my knees right now and begged you to spare my friends? Would that satisfy you?" "It would be a start." "And if I promised that humanity would join the hegemony immediately, without any negotiation or conditions?" "That would be better." Nodded slowly. "But it wouldn't be enough, would it? You'd still execute them as examples, because that's what the hegemony does. You rule through fear, and fear requires examples." Said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. "So their fate was decided the moment you arrested them," continued. "This conversation is just theater. You want me to beg so you can feel like you've broken me before you kill them anyway." "You could still save them," said, though her voice lacked conviction. "No, Commander, I don't think I can, because this isn't really about espionage or membership agreements. This is about you trying to understand why I'm not afraid of you." Stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "You've shown me your weapons, your history, your power. You've arrested my friends and threatened to kill them. You've made it clear that you could destroy my entire species without breaking stride." He turned back to face her, and for the first time since they had met, his expression was completely serious. "And yet here I am, still not trembling before your mighty presence, still not begging for mercy or promising submission. That bothers you, doesn't it?" Felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "You should be afraid," she said, her voice rising. "Do you understand what I could do to you, what I could do to your friends, what I could do to your entire species?" "Yes," said quietly, "I understand perfectly." "Then why?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. all her frustration and confusion pouring out in those two words. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" Looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. The polite interest disappeared, replaced by something deeper and more complex. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to fill the entire room. "Because I've seen what happens when humans stop being afraid," he said softly. Stared at him, suddenly aware that something fundamental was about to change. The human captain who had seemed so unremarkable, so ordinary, was looking at her with eyes that held depths she was only beginning to understand. And for the first time in 200 years, Commander of the Hegemony felt the cold touch of genuine fear. Walked to the large window that looked out over S's fleet. Hundreds of Hegemony warships floated in perfect formation, their weapons powered down but ready. Each vessel represented the military might of dozens of worlds, technologies that could reshape reality itself, and the absolute authority of the most powerful force in known space. "Do you know what my species calls ourselves?" asked quietly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Not just humans, but specifically when we talk about our place in the universe." Found herself leaning forward despite her confusion. "No." "Survivors." His voice was calm, but somehow it seemed to echo in the large office. "We're the species that survived ice ages without fur. We survived predators without claws or fangs. We survived diseases that should have wiped us out, disasters that should have ended us, and wars that nearly destroyed our own planet." He turned away from the window to face her directly. "We survived by becoming the most dangerous thing in any environment we entered." Felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You're trying to threaten me." "No, Commander. I'm trying to explain why threats don't work on humans." Moved closer to her desk, and somehow his ordinary appearance seemed less harmless than it had before. "You want me to be afraid of your weapons, your fleets, your reputation. But my species learned something important a very long time ago." "What?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "The only thing more dangerous than a cornered animal is a human who has nothing left to lose." Sat back down in the chair across from her desk, but now his relaxed posture seemed less like submission and more like the confidence of a predator at rest. "We've faced extinction before, Commander. Many times, from ice ages and volcanic winters that blocked out the sun, from plagues that killed 9 out of every 10 people, from ourselves when we nearly destroyed our planet with nuclear weapons. Each time, we survived not by being stronger or smarter or more advanced, but by refusing to stay down." Tried to speak, but found her voice had abandoned her. "You can destroy our worlds," continued, his tone never rising above conversational. "You can kill me, you can kill my friends, you can glass every planet we've ever called home. But there will always be more of us, somewhere, rebuilding and remembering and waiting for our chance." "That's impossible," managed. "No species can survive total destruction." Smiled, and there was something in that expression that made her skin crawl. "Commander, you've been showing me your history for the past 3 days. 12,000 years of conquest and expansion. Very impressive. Would you like to hear about human history?" She nodded without meaning to. "We've existed as a species for roughly 300,000 years, said. For most of that time, we lived in small groups, hunting with stone tools and fighting each other for resources. We had no advanced technology, no unified government, no grand civilization. Just small bands of humans trying to survive in a hostile world." He paused, and his next words seemed to carry the weight of, "Guess which one of us got better at killing?" Felt her breath catch in her throat. "We spent 300,000 years learning how to survive when everything was trying to kill us," continued. "Other humans, wild animals, diseases, natural disasters, starvation, exposure. We learned to make weapons from rocks and sticks. We learned to hunt creatures 10 times our size. We learned to fight wars that lasted for generations." stood up and walked to one of the displays showing hegemony battle formations. You rule through superior technology and overwhelming force. That works well against species that depend on technology. But humans learned a long time ago that technology can fail, weapons can break, and numbers don't always matter. "What are you saying?" asked, though part of her already knew. "I'm saying that you've built something magnificent here, Commander. A galaxy-spanning empire held together by fear and force. But empires fall. Technology becomes obsolete. Even the mightiest armies eventually face defeat." Turned back to her, and his ordinary human eyes now seemed to hold depths of experience that she couldn't begin to fathom. "But humans, we just keep coming back." Tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. "You're just one species among billions. You have primitive weapons and no defenses against our technology." "You're right," agreed cheerfully. "We can't match your weapons or your ships or your numbers. If you decide to destroy humanity tomorrow, you'll probably succeed. Most of us will die, our cities will burn, and our colonies will be reduced to ash." "Then why aren't you afraid?" Smile widened, and realized with growing horror that it was the patient smile of someone who could wait as long as necessary for their moment to come. "Because some of us will survive. We always do. And those survivors will remember what you did to us. They'll remember your ships, your weapons, your tactics. They'll learn from their defeat and they'll adapt." He moved closer to her desk, and she found herself pressing back in her chair. "Maybe it will take 50 years, maybe 100, maybe 1,000, but eventually those survivors will find a weakness in your empire, a flaw in your technology, a moment when your guard is down." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "And then they'll show you what 300,000 years of learning how to kill has taught the human race." That's impossible," stammered. "The hegemony has never been defeated. We've crushed species far more advanced than yours." "I'm sure you have," replied. "But were any of those species survivors, Commander? Had any of them spent hundreds of thousands of years learning to endure suffering, to adapt to any environment, to keep fighting when all hope was lost?" Walked back to the window and gestured at the fleet outside. "You know what I see when I look at your ships? I see an empire that's grown soft from 12,000 years of easy victories. You've forgotten what it's like to fight for survival because you haven't had to. Everything you've conquered either surrendered immediately or fell quickly to your superior technology." He turned back to her one final time. "But humans remember what desperation feels like. We remember what it's like to have nothing left but the will to keep fighting. And we've never forgotten the most important lesson our history taught us." "What lesson?" whispered. His expression became almost gentle, like a teacher explaining something simple to a confused student. "That the strongest predator in any ecosystem isn't the one with the biggest teeth or the strongest muscles. It's the one that refuses to give up, even when everything else has surrendered or died." The silence that followed was profound. Stared at this unremarkable human who had somehow turned her world upside down. She had spent 3 days trying to frighten him, and instead he had made her afraid for the first time in centuries. "Besides," added, almost as an afterthought, "I've read your psychological profiles on humanity. You think we're emotional and unpredictable, prone to violence and difficult to control. You're right about all of that." He moved toward the door, and she made no effort to stop him. "But there's something else about humans that your profiles missed, Commander. Something that makes us different from every other species you've encountered." "What?" Paused at the door and looked back at her with something that might have been pity. "We're patient." As the door closed behind him, sat alone in her office, staring out at her vast fleet and trying to understand what had just happened. She had arrested his friends and threatened to kill them. She had shown him the fate of entire civilizations. She had made it clear that humanity faced extinction if they refused to submit. And somehow, he had made her feel like the one in danger. For the first time in her long career, commander of the hegemony found herself wondering if her people had finally encountered something they couldn't defeat. Not because humanity was stronger or more advanced, but because they were something far worse. They were survivors who had spent 300,000 years learning to wait for the perfect moment to strike back. The humans' answer had indeed left her breathless, because she finally understood what made humans terrifying. It wasn't their weapons or their courage or their numbers. It was their absolute refusal to surrender, combined with the patience of a species that had learned to measure victories not in years or decades, but in centuries, and realized with growing dread that humanity's war with the hegemony had already begun. It had started the moment walked onto her ship without fear, and it would continue long after she was dead and forgotten. Because humans, as had so calmly explained, were very good at playing the long game.